Hello, I'm Jenny Fern and welcome to my library. I am a chaotic neutral mechanical engineer who's really into permaculture and wants to talk about books. So let's talk about books. My little doggy's gonna take a drink of water, so time for me to have some coffee. I've slightly fallen off the wagon of my reading goals for this year because one of my reading goals this year was to read more from the books on my shelves and less from the library or other places where I would be reading books that are not currently on my shelves. I've fallen off of this for two reasons. One is because I've just recently been reading a ton of manga, of which I don't own very much, so it's from the library. And the other reason is because I've been wanting to read audiobooks, and I've been wanting to read random audiobooks from my library. So I'm using my library a little bit more than I was anticipating, I guess. But we're just gonna go for it. We're gonna have some fun. And this is all about reading completely random audiobooks from my library. So I've already completed reading one. So I read that was weird. I was reading a middle grade book called Monstrous Devices. I thought this was like a pretty fun plot. The whole idea was there are these little toy robots, and there's this boy, his grandpa is really into collecting toy robots, and he delivers one to his house. And then like weird things start happening. Hey buddy. Sorry, Gordon's being annoying, so we're just gonna hold him hostage. Hi bud. There's this little boy, and he's gotten this toy robot from his grandpa, and it's like doing weird things. Like he's staying up late to write this essay, but he falls asleep, he wakes up, and the essay's complete. Like stuff like that. They go on this big adventure in different places in Europe. It's a fun mix of things because there's this whole toy robot thing, and it gets like combined with the idea of a golem. So there's like the whole folklore and like myth, I guess, of the golem also explored within this story about these toy robots. I thought it was really fun, and it's very like action-y. It really plays like a visual scene. I could see it as like a little movie, except for the ending, which really just had kind of strange pacing, and I couldn't really follow what was happening, to be completely honest. You want to be held again like a baby? Okay. Whoa, that was the first book, Monstrous Devices. I definitely wouldn't have picked it out. I'd never heard of it or anything. I do enjoy reading children's middle grade. I don't think I would pick this one out because it just didn't seem like I'm the demographic, or I would have been the demographic as a child. But I did have a fun time with it, and I did enjoy it. The next book that I have is called Necessary Trouble by Drew Gilpin Faust, and it seems like this is a book about being a child in the 1950s. I don't really know anything about it, but that's the next book. Hopefully I like it. I'm gonna be making some breakfast while I listen to this. I have just finished reading the book Necessary Trouble, Growing Up at Mid-Century by the historian Drew Gilpin Faust. And this was a memoir couched in the historical context of the 1950s up till about 1970. So if I have heard of or seen this historian before, I have not been aware. Drew was a girl growing up in the 1950s and then going to college in the 1960s. So she goes through this memoir in more of a historical lens, and she's looking at some of the nationwide in the United States and worldwide events that shaped this period of her young life and who she ultimately becomes. She goes through civil rights, Cold War impact, and Vietnam War impact on her life and those around her. In the beginning of the book, she discusses her relationship with her mother, and aspects of her gender, her relationship with her class and her family's status and how it came to be, and these discussions about gender and class as it relates to her family and her experiences. I did enjoy it. I felt like it was well written. It was exposure to something that I wouldn't have picked up on my own. I just haven't had that much interest in hearing what it was like growing up as a baby boomer. Oh, I guess the other aspect, she does talk about like more of her family history, and so that discusses like the whole baby boomer war, like her parents' relationship. So there is like a broader historical context than just her own lived experience, but it is mainly told through the perspective of her family, her context. So it's a really interesting blend of historical context and memoir, which I don't think I've quite experienced before. So I wouldn't normally have picked this up. I do read nonfiction, I do read memoir every once in a while, but this perspective of reading from a baby boomer. But to me, there were some similar sentiments to a book that I read earlier this year, Black Swans by Eve Babbitt's, where it's kind of like that time period of being a teenager and young adult was so revolutionary and there was so much happening, and it's kind of like, you know, what happened? Like, where did we go wrong? The author here does not go into that where did we go wrong with the current day and how things kind of panned out for her in her life, but I kind of could feel that similar upbringing, that similar vibe of just having such a revolutionary childhood, the time that you were maybe like 10 years old till the time that you're like 25. So much has happened in terms of like personal liberties for so many people. It must have been very exciting. I thought it was a solid read, but not exactly my cup of tea. It was definitely something worth reading and worth getting exposure to. With all that said, I think it's time to select the next random book from my library. Okay, so what I have picked out is A Misfortune, Free Man by Elizabeth Yates. This has a Newbery Award based on a true story. It seems that it's about a slave who becomes free at about 60. This is also meant for younger readers, for like children. Hey, this is what I got, so let's check it out. I'm always getting exposed to things I just would never pick up. I would never pick up children's books that are about these topics because these are things that I would have read in like school, you know? They're not the things that I'm reaching for as an adult. I'm gonna go tuck into bed because I got a little bit of a headache. I feel pretty bad. Sore throat and all that too. So hopefully some good rest will help me feel quite a bit better. I want to get this update out of the way because I'm really sad about it. It's affecting my mood. My cat is very, very sick. He's at the vet. I don't know if he's gonna be okay. That is the update on the world's most favorite boy, Gordon. We do have a Shmeeb in frame, so she is here for us. We also have a Louie. Let me rant about a book to keep my mind off of things. So I read a book randomly selected from my library, and it was called A Misfortune? Wow, it's like really dark outside. 1, there is a fire, but 2, I think it's just like cloudy. So I read A Misfortune, Free Man by Elizabeth Yates. This got a Newbery Award. I thought this was awful. This is a children's non-fiction kind of book published in 1950. It is based on a real man. He was captured by slave traders. He was sold into slavery when he was a young man, or I guess a teenager. He was 15, was sold to one person, and then he was promised, or there was some level of like, he thought he was going to be freed by this man, but he died before he was able to free him. Like, what does that even mean? So much of this book is really upsetting because it is just straight propaganda. It is Christian propaganda and it is American propaganda. It was wrapped in this, wow, a slave achieved so much. But in that was all of this bizarre messaging about slavery, about like the morals around slavery, about owning slaves, about African people, their own agency or lack thereof. It was really awful. I gave this 1 star. It was really, really terrible. The writing was fine. It's a children's book, so it was really bare bones, and it's based on history to an extent. I will say there was one mention of like the process of tanning, which was very clearly just the written description of the author's research on tanning, because Amos becomes a tanner in his free life. This is all about the slave who buys his own freedom. It's so strange because these slave owners are like held up as good people because they were willing to let him be free. It's just wild to me that that is how this is framed, because they bought a guy. They were like, we need to buy this guy because he's going to be raised and tortured and punished and terrible things are going to happen to him, but we still need to buy him and not set him free immediately because he needs to learn Christian values and American values. The course of his life takes place before the American Revolution and then after the American Revolution, and there is this tying together of the freedom of America from British tyranny and the slaves, and how this slave was able to free himself just like America was able to free herself. And it is just a load of hot shit. I was so disgusted by the way things were phrased in this book, because it wraps itself around as this kind of like, ooh, liberal, oh, slavery's bad, but also maybe it's kind of good. It was disgusting. Genuinely one of the worst books that I've ever read. So I want to share with you one of the bookmarks that I guess this is the only bookmark because I was just so grossed out by this. So I'm going to share just a small snippet of this bookmark.
Once, long years ago, I thought I could set a canoe load of my people free by breaking the bands at my wrists and killing the white man who held the weapon. I had the strength in my hands to do such a deed, and I had the fire within, but I didn't do it. What held you back? My hand was restrained, and I'm glad that it was, for the years between have shown me that it does a man no good to be free until he knows how to live, how to walk in step with God.
It is an insane point to make that it was good for this 15-year-old boy to have not escaped his enslavers when he was still in his own original place of birth, that it was good for him not to have done that. And it was like a message that he received from God or something. Like, he was restrained. He is literally restrained by his enslavers. Come on. That it was good that this happened because he needed to learn like a lesson before he was able to experience freedom. Like, he was not a good enough person or a worthy enough person. He did not earn freedom yet. it makes me so incensed because it is genuinely just an insane point to make, and I am beyond frustrated that I see people rating this book as a good book. This is an awful book. This is an awful book. The messaging underlying this book, the moral that we receive from this book is very, very damaging. That's how I felt about this absolute piece of trash. Not happy that I read this, but I guess I'm happy that I get to tell you that this is worthless. This is not worth your time. If somebody wanted to tell the story of this man, this was not the way to do it. And I think it is perfectly fine to tell a new, adequately researched story about this man. The propaganda in this book is off the chain. The next book that I've randomly selected from my library is Isaac Asimov's Foundation. There was some slight cheating on this front because the first book that was randomly generated from my library was in Spanish called Los Ingratos, and I'm just not gonna read a book in Spanish. I could maybe if I did it really, really slowly, but probably not really. I can read children's books in Spanish, but I'm not at that reading comprehension level. After Los Ingratos is Foundation and Empire by Asimov. This said number 4 in series, so I looked it up, and there's 2 prequels, and then there's one like first written book, and that is Foundation. So I actually went over and picked up just Foundation on its own. I will be reading Foundation. Anyway, thank you for letting me rant about somebody genuinely trying to justify slavery. So I have been reading Foundation. I am about 40% through it. I've been really enjoying it. It has been interesting reading about like the fall of a great civilization and the ideas around the fall of an empire, because I'd also been seeing a lot of those like history and art history related videos. I think you'll recognize what I'm talking about if I show a picture. There were a bunch that were about ruins of civilizations, the last remaining pieces of these really massive empires that lasted for a very long time. The idea that empires will always fall. I didn't realize that this book was going to be about that topic. So on a personal note, we do have Gordon back from the vet, but he is not doing well at all. He is very, very sick. We don't know what we're gonna get out of him. We're just kind of trying to take care of him. Just trying to not mope around in the bed with him all day, but that is also what I want to do to some extent. Okay, why am I so dark? I think this will make me brighter. No. It's like exceedingly bright out, and yet I look like this. Where do I go? Okay, I guess this will do. I've been taking care of my very sick cat, and he just started eating. We've been doing these subcutaneous fluids where I literally have to stick a needle into my cat and then like drip liquid into him. I've learned a lot within the last like few days of how to give him pills, how to stick him with needles, generally taking care of an ailing animal. So I've been reading Foundation. I finished it. I really enjoyed the first part, which is about this guy. I think his name is Harry Seldon. And he is like this mathematical sociologist kind of guy. I can't remember what the phrasing is used for him, for his like science study. But he has figured that civilization is coming to an end, and in order to lessen that dark ages period of time in between civilization falling and the next one building up, he wanted to form a foundation that would work on an encyclopedia, get all of the knowledge together, and that was kind of that first story, that first section of the book is about that. And I really, really enjoyed that story. Then I think I followed the next piece okay. It follows the planet where the encyclopedist folks are living and kind of the future of that world to some extent. And then we get into like a lot of like very political stuff and a lot of like plots and yeah, really just politics. And I didn't really enjoy it. Thank you. I didn't really follow it very well. We just got to the point where there was too many people to follow. Like I didn't really understand what the story was anymore. And at the end completely snuck up on me. It was like the end of Foundation. And I was like, what just happened? Genuinely don't know what happened at the end of that book. I don't know. Just a couple of guys talking. I think it was some sort of like a gotcha. There was like a lot to do with like the different technologies that different societies had at certain points. Like, oh, do they still have nuclear power or not? Ultimately, again, I really, really enjoyed that first section of the book. Most of the rest of it was a bit of a slog. Clearly, I was just kind of like letting it wash through me and not absorbing it at all. That was how Foundation went. I think it was good, just maybe not so for me. I do tend to have a hard time when we follow many characters and when I don't have enough time with a character to like figure out who they are. If there's too many of them, I won't know I don't know who it is. I'm just not very good at quickly taking a character and figuring out what their situation is or who their voice is. I'm not very good at reading works that have many characters. Yeah, maybe just a not for me, or I would have to read it as a series of short stories instead of... I just didn't realize that that's what this book was. And I think if I had known that going in, I maybe would have read it a little differently with more intention around like understanding that these things aren't necessarily connected except for through, it's the same world and we're following generally the outcome of this world. That's how I felt about that. I have mixed feelings about if I should select another book or not, but I do think I'm going to switch it up and start reading some of the books from my own shelves, just because that is more of my intentional reading goal for this year, and this was kind of a fun little break in the middle of it, kind of back to my old ways, kind of how I used to read, just fully random at some times. Like I read I think I read the last book in the spin-off series of The Selection because it was available, and I had no idea that it was the last book, and I had no idea that it was like the spin-off, and it was not good. But I was having a really hard time sleeping, so I read it anyway. I'm going to go check up on the boy, see if he's eating. Do we want to see him? Do you guys want to see him? I feel like it's sad. He's really not doing well. The extreme shift from totally fine to unwell has been really shocking for me. I have been editing some of my older videos that I have in my backlog, and it is really, really sad to see how so recently he was doing so much better. With the animal care that I've been doing, I have not been doing much self-care. I can definitely see I'm slipping into a depression mode where I'm just not cleaning myself, not really eating, just sleeping a lot. So sorry about it. I think I should end this video. Let me know, what is the best book that you have ever read, randomly selected from the library? What is the worst book that you've read, randomly selected from the library? Have you ever read anything randomly selected from the library? What was your experience? I would love to hear your stories. I hope you enjoyed this. Lou, Come here! If you enjoyed this, consider sharing it with somebody who you think would also enjoy it. Consider liking and subscribing, and I will be back again soon.